What's up, YouTube? Looks like we're online. Just checking all the stuff. Okay, it looks like we're okay. Let's jump right in. A lot of big brain topics to talk about today. So, the theme is science fiction, fantasy, punks, and junks. The punks, that's going to refer to, we're going to talk more about the cyberpunk subgenre stuff, so that's the punks. And then the junks is these Asian sailing ships. Junks, because we're going to be talking about the Asia people. How do Asia people fit into a lot of this stuff? Because the Asian aesthetics and stuff figure prominently into a lot of visions in the future. So we'll be talking about how that is so and why that is so. Let's see. Today I'm going to try to switch out the editor I'm using, so you may notice that this window looks different from what it normally does in this stream. I'm using this ancient software called Emacs. Actually, I gotta adjust my... And I did it. Okay, no, it was fine. It just doesn't show the toolbar. So there was no problem. Anyways, this software has a little bit more features than what I was using, and I could just like click on it and stuff. So I'm gonna give this a go. We'll see how it works out. And I'm copying some of the themes from friend of the show, Shelley. Here's a recent stream he did earlier today, but you could see he uses this Emacs editor. So as a technology enthusiast, I am stealing my favorite aspects of his setup and bringing them to Alan's stream, because we want to have the best of technology the world has to offer here. We are on the cutting edge. Cool. And then, let's see, besides this in stream news, it was recommended to me to start updating the stream notes somewhere. So I think I will plan on doing that eventually. I guess kind of from a management business sort of perspective, the reasons for not doing this would basically be if it would be a liability to me, or like potentially me putting the effort to do something like putting up the show notes, if that could actually spell trouble for me and not give any benefit to the show, then I wouldn't do it. But just thinking about it, maybe it could be a good way to help promote the stream, because people might stumble across the notes, look through the notes, and that might be a good way to share what sort of things we talk about here. So I think it could be good. So I'll look into doing that. I already have the technology and stuff to do it. It's more of like an administrative decision why I haven't done that just yet, though I think it could be good. Okay, what else? Alright, so related to today's topic, science fiction, fantasy, punks, and junks, let's go through our words of the day so we could all slowly learn our Greek and Latin. Our Latin word of the day is this word, fictiō, the word that we get the English word fiction from. So here, pulling up on Wiktionary. So by the way, if any of you all get serious into studying these languages and stuff, Wiktionary, they have all these tables showing you how to properly decline all the nouns. So this could be helpful, especially if you're relatively new and don't know these things so well, like me, when it comes to Latin and Greek. You'll have to do a little bit of research to learn the grammar theory behind it, but it's not so hard once you get used to it. So fictiō, Latin, and example sentence. Here we study the many fictiones of the technocratic overlords. So they develop all these fictions for us to get interested in, to become distracted by. But here, we try to unpack and look at the deeper meanings behind the many images, stories, and stuff that we're presented with, and understand, like, did the metaverse, did that just come out of nowhere? Or rather, have there been lots of things predicting and leading up to what we now see today as the metaverse? Okay, so Latin word, fictio, plural fictiones, of fiction, fictionis, fictionum. Yes, you could drill your noun declensions. All right, Greek word. This is the word that we get technology from in English. So technologia, from techni, meaning craftsmanship or art, and logia, or explanation. So the explanation of the craftsman or craftsmanship, the art. That's how we get technologia from. And I want to point out the etymology of this word is revealing, because it's closer to what would be called technique in this book, the Technological Society. I did like a whole bunch of streams on Alan's stream. So technology isn't like machines narrowly, but more broadly like how people do things. So you want to produce a particular sort of object, then you'll have a techni in order to do that. And if you study technologies in the technologia sense, then that would be instructing yourself on how a lot of different stuff is put together. And example sentences: we use technologies to cope with the difficulties of modern life. Yes. So rather than doing things the manual way, a lot of the time we employ little machines and tricks and tips in order to try to make our lives more convenient. But maybe all of that is just cope, and at the end of the day, by trying to take all these shortcuts, we just end up making our lives more complicated. I'll let you all ponder that, and we could talk about it some other time on the stream. Okay. So let's see. Alright, I just got confused for a second because I lost one of my windows. Still getting used to all the softwares we're using here. Okay. So that takes care of words of the day. Now let's get into our topic notes for today. So I was recommended this topic of looking at science fiction, fantasy, and then maybe even more generally, we could just say the whole notion of fiction. I think speaking to, an audience that's using computers and stuff, we've all grown up with being very familiar with having fiction all around us. Okay, I'll say from my own childhood, right, going up through school, there would be all these programs at public libraries, at school, encouraging people to read. So, we'll just look at an example. I'll show you that this is still a thing. So I'm going to search, summer reading program, and let's see what sorts of stuff comes up. Alright, so this, well, I've already said I'm in Sacramento, so no need to worry about doxing myself. It's known. Most public libraries around California that I've seen, they all have some form of a summer reading program. So you sign up, and then it's the more books you read, the more points you get, and they might have a little game that you could go through. So, what are they doing to the kids? Teen anime trivia? Alright, well maybe the internet canceled the teen anime trivia night, but interesting. Okay, so anyways, the main point I'm making here is that all over you have kids encouraged to read generally, and a lot of what reading might mean is reading a lot of novels or fiction of various sorts. Okay, Scholastic.com. That's a big publisher that does stuff for schools. Let's just take a look. All right. Let's read this blurb. We know summertime can provide tremendous opportunities for kids to accelerate reading, to experience the social, emotional impact of good literature and stories, and to make up for any lost learning time, as access to instruction and reading has been completely rethought due to the health crisis. Research has proven that in a typical year, summer reading supports skill gains, and its absence leads to widening skill gaps. So you gotta level up the reading skill on your playable character, which is you. That'll be relevant. We're gonna be talking about avatars and all sorts of stuff in this stream. So you all hang tight. Okay, with this in mind, our Scholastic Summer Reading Promise is to help you get books in the hands of kids, support social, emotional well-being, build skills, and create community among kids. So let's just say that there's an incredibly, like every positive sounding, good sounding buzzword could be found around the general idea of telling kids to read, generally. And maybe in another stream we could take a closer look at what exactly kids are being told to read. Is there just a general list? Let's just look for recommended reading young readers. So targeting like school age kids. Let's look at NPR's best books for young readers. What does NPR say the kids should read? Okay, Where the Wild Things Are. So kid dresses up in a wolf suit and causes trouble. Then his mom sends him to go romp around with some wild creatures. The Old Truck. Crown, an ode to the fresh cut. Is this about a kid getting a haircut? What's this about? The barber shop is where the magic happens. Boys go in as lumps of clay, and with princely robes draped around their shoulders, a dab of cool shaving cream on their foreheads, and slow, steady cut, they become royalty. So you go in as moldable clay and you come out a king if you go and get a haircut. Alright. That's a premise I hadn't thought about. Jourdian is a mermaid. What's that about? When riding the subway home from the pool with his abuela, the Spanish word for grandmother, one day, so Julian notices three women spectacularly dressed up. Their hair billows in bright hues, their dresses end in fishtails, and their joy fills the train car. When Julian gets home, daydreaming of the magic he's seen, all he can think about is dressing up just as the ladies in his own fabulous mermaid costume. A butter yellow curtain for his tail, the fronds of a potted fern for his headdress. But what will Abuela think about the mess he makes, and even more importantly, what will she think about how Julian sees himself? So somebody sees some mermaids, and then the kid wants to play dress up. So interesting, right? We get one book here. I don't know if this is I don't know what the mermaids here are supposed to symbolize. We could add that. Let's add that to our another topic to discuss further. The meaning of mermaids. Interesting. But one of them, kid wants to play dress up. Another one, how cool haircuts are. And let's just look at one more, and then we'll get back on topic. Okay, Miss Rumphius. What is this book about? Barbara Cooney's story of Alice Rumphius, who longed to travel the world, live in a house by the sea, and do something to make the world more beautiful, has a timeless quality that resonates with each new generation. So this book, was it written some years ago? Okay, from 1982. So, what exactly is the book about? Who's the author? Who is Barbara Cooney? Well, seems like an author that has written many books, so a pretty prolific one. Okay, under the topics of science and nature, environment, people and places, the United States. We'll just look at this really quick. I'm intrigued. What is Miss Rumphius about? Okay, let's take a look. So Miss Rumphius. The book opens with the narrator telling readers about a little old woman nicknamed the Lupine Lady. So lupus being like wolf. So this lady's called wolf-like for some reason, who lives in a small house overlooking the sea. The story of her great aunt, Miss Rumphius, begins to unfold, starting when her aunt was just a little girl named Alice. In illustrations depicting the late 1800s, the young Alice lives with her grandparents near a waterfront shipping town. Her grandfather, an immigrant who arrived by boat to America himself, now carves the figureheads of sailing ships in his old age. And figureheads are carved wooden decorations found at the bow of ships, generally designed related to the name or role of a ship. And there's an example. At night, he regales his granddaughter with stories of exotic places across the sea. Inspired, Alice tells her grandfather that when she grows up, she will travel to faraway places and settle down by the sea when she grows old, just as he did. He agrees that her plans are all very well, but goes on to tell her that she might do one more thing. You must do something to make the world more beautiful. Alice resolves to follow her grandfather's advice, though she is not sure how. Let's see. We're joined by a guest. Mimtal says, during one of these scholastic fairs in school, I ended up reading a bizarre Afro-cyberpunk young adult sci-fi novel about child trafficking in Zimbabwe. It also involves human sacrifice to pagan gods with some Epstein stuff implied. I think it's called The Eye, the Ear, the Arm. Yeah, okay, so good note here. One of the points that I'm making is a lot of these stories and stuff that we're seeing that kids are told, right? They're presented as, here's just all these books, here's all these stories. It's good. It could build skills and literacy and all this stuff. But it'll be through these books that all sorts of weird ideas come to be mainstreamed. So let's just skip down a little bit and see how this Alice girl, and just notice too, this name Alice, another kid story that's written by kind of esoteric creeper weirdos, is this popular Alice Adventures in Wonderland story. And this is is this like fun for kids and stuff, or is it some weirdo tripped out drug guy's fantasies that are presented to people? So you could look into the history of Lewis Carroll and what he does. Let's look at his religion and philosophy and politics. Okay, actually, I'll just add this to the future topics. We could look into Alice in Wonderland more, but I think it does have some kind of weird esoteric connections that I'm not prepared to dive into right here now on stream, but I think they're there. I think that this is not just me making stuff up. If you do dive and look, you will not be disappointed. Okay. So just let's finish up looking at Miss Rumphius. So this person, they go to places like the land of the lotus eaters, which in this work is Tunisia in North Africa. So going all over the world. Lupine seeds. So she sends off for as many lupine seeds as she can acquire and begins scattering them all over her community, along cliffside roads, near buildings in town, along stone walls, and in hollows behind hills. People who see her think she's crazy, but the following spring, it becomes clear she accomplished her goal. Her community is bursting with colorful lupines everywhere. She has made the world more beautiful. So she accomplishes her mission to make the world more beautiful by introducing a species all over her town, scattering all these flowers, and after going to places like the land of the lotus eaters. Let's see what people use lupine for. They were popular with the Romans. They're used for cooking. And some people are allergic to them. Okay, so I haven't read this book, so I can't give an in-depth analysis of the story. But that's to say, like, okay, what is the moral of the story? Like, the protagonist of the story supposedly makes the world more beautiful by just scattering all sorts of seeds everywhere. I think if you did that in California, they'll probably say you're like some sort of agricultural terrorist or something for introducing non-native species or something. I don't think you could pull that off where I am. But, apparently that's something that's good. For little kids to think about. What happened to just having books about how it's like good to share and like, don't hit people and, be polite and stuff? What happened to that? Apparently instead you should go around and spread seeds to make the world more beautiful. So that's that. Okay, so reading all this stuff, it's everywhere. So I looked up this difference, trying to say, how do people define fantasy? How do people define science fiction? And what is that opposed to? So this term was actually recommended by a viewer of the show Literary Fiction. So I'll just read this definition of literary fiction. Literary fiction is a controversial label that in the book trade refers to market novels which do not neatly fit into an established genre, or otherwise refer to novels that are character-driven rather than plot-driven, examine the human condition, use language in an experimental or poetic fashion, or are simply considered serious art. So I kind of came up with my own definition of this. We could talk about science fiction and fantasy as specifically having scientific or fantasy elements as one of the key drivers for that sort of work, whereas something like a literary fiction, traditional fiction storytelling, here I'll just read what I wrote, might be fictional in that it isn't a report about an actual specific individual, but the goals are to describe the reality we all inhabit rather than invent something new. Escapism isn't the goal, rather that medium of literature gives the storyteller more creative freedom to bring attention to important things without being bogged down by specifics. So, for example, you might write a story about, I don't know about that Miss Rumphius or whatever it was called, that book we read, but maybe you would actually put that under a sort of literary fiction type, in that it's a story about, a girl who grows up to be a woman and her travels around the world, and then the story is trying to express some principles about the world, such as, do stuff to make the world beautiful in the way you see fit, even if there's opposition. Like, I don't know what sort of message it's sending, but maybe that would be an example of literary fiction. Now, on the other hand, we could look at genres like fantasy. So I'm just borrowing these bullet points, summarizing some of the stuff on Wikipedia. Let's see what are some traits of fantasy. So magic or other supernatural elements as a main plot element, theme, or setting. So magic itself, like, I don't know, people shoot fireballs or do curses. Magic practitioners, like sorcerers, witches, and magical creatures are common. Often they're in a medieval setting. And then history or nature don't have to be coherent. Stuff could just happen. And there's a big element of world building. Tony Trans is sup. Hi, Tony. Good to have you join us today. So, let's just consider, Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter would have all these elements. Of course, magic creatures. The medieval thing, right? I don't know if you'd say Harry Potter's in, a medieval setting, but to have, castles and knights, so a lot of the things that we would associate with medieval times, even if they're in some kind of transformed form, you get a bunch of that. And it doesn't have to be coherent or make sense. So, in Harry Potter, I don't know, could you say, oh no, the law of conservation of mass is violated, or something like that? It doesn't matter in this sort of genre. Other stuff will matter. So that's fantasy. And I want to note, there's this interesting phenomenon where in Asia, the fantasy genre, especially of a European look, is especially popular. So I kept on hearing people meme about this game called Genshin Impact. I haven't played or looked into this at all, beyond just visiting their website here. But I just wanted to show the aesthetics of this thing. So clearly you have parchments, I forgot what they call these things, the astrolabe or something. Tony says, have you read Berserk? I've not actually read Berserk, but especially, I think the author recently passed. I've looked at the artworks and basic premise of Berserk. And this too, I think you could consider it fantasy genre, but it has a lot of these overtly spiritual aspects, I think angels and demons, this sort of thing, explicitly mentioned. One anime I have watched is another good example is the Full Metal Alchemist series, both the Brotherhood and the one that isn't called Brotherhood. But this too, right? They're kind of like Germans, and there's these people group that are kind of like Arabs, and all these things. Anyways, in this series, I would consider this fantasy, and that the magic is the namesake of this alchemy, right? So they try to have like a kind of a logic or coherence to how the magic works in this series, but they don't have to like explain it or prove it's real with science or something like that. That's why it's a fantasy series. Anyways, this is just to show, so Berserk, Full Metal Alchemist, these would be examples of showing how a lot of these Western aesthetics are like super popular in Asia. So here, look, I mean, these are like European style castles, like Germany or something. You got the blonde haired people, and yeah, you could even look at this names like Mondstadt. So here, yeah, they got some Japanese vibes, Japanese sounding name, Chinese sounding name, and then like a Western sounding name. So maybe in this particular game or series or whatever, they try to have a fantasy world roughly based on 3 different civilizations. But crucially, even when we're looking at like Chinese, Japanese too, you could see how you could have Chinese medieval, Japanese medieval, and then Western medieval. Tony says, I find that women authors can't make consistent world building. What do you think? You know, I'm not going to try to unpack that. I would say like the world building project generally, like I hear, for example, with Star Wars, right? With Star Wars, you get all sorts of different people contributing, making different works, whether it's of course the movies, and then people will write like fan fiction novels. So you'll have like armies of nerds on forums and stuff that will sort of police the consistency of a world. I haven't actually looked into, like, let's say Harry Potter, but it seems like, you know, Harry Potter has a huge following, and maybe they do have a pretty coherent world, and it's by like a female author. So I'm not going to assume that there's a difference between men or women being able to make coherent worlds. And let's just say too, if we're talking about magic stuff too, right? There's witches, there's warlocks. Like part of the whole point of a lot of this magic nerd stuff is like, oh yeah, you know, we're not just some dumb guy who swings a big sword. Instead, we're like big smart mages, magic people that use our big brains to make you know, cool effects. So I think that the nature of the magic part of the fantasy genre is the sort of equalizing force for male and female. It's like, it doesn't matter if you're male, female, or neither, you know, like everybody could be a wizard. I think that's actually one of the big selling points of like the fantasy genre, and why a lot of nerds will get into it, right? It's like, I hate sports. I'm no good. They pick on me. So then what do? You run away to the library, and then you start reading fantasy novels. So you know, you don't want to like diss on your target audience for a lot of this stuff. George says, "Hey punk," and Reaper says, "Hello. What's up, Reaper?" Oh, and I gotta flip. I realized my chat was on top chat, not live chat. So I'll adjust this. Make sure that I get the messages coming through. Reaper says, did I miss the Tolkien part of the fantasy genre? No, we didn't talk about Tolkien specifically. I'll add him to a list of future topics. We could talk about those pesky Anglos and what they do. Okay. So just one more Asian bit. So there's this idea of the magic girl. This is a whole genre with the anime people. The Mahou Shoujo, or the magic girl. So if you search up a term like this, you know, you will find a absurd amount of content that has to do with like magic princesses of various sorts. I think, okay, here, like Sailor Moon, I think would fall under this genre. But then here's another example of like Japanese produced material that is using a lot of like Western aesthetics and stuff. And similarly, we're going to be looking at how with science fiction, it's extremely common for like Western authors, Western artists, people to incorporate the East Asian aesthetics. But that's just to say, if we're talking about cultural appropriation, all that stuff, it's like obviously the Asians are having a field day reinventing heresies of the West. So here is one of the images for world building. It shows a rendered constructed world as seen from outer space. I don't know, it seems like a lot of our photos from outer space kind of have this sort of character. I'll leave that all as an exercise for you all to think about, but it seems like a lot of what we're told about cosmology seems like an exercise in world building. I don't know, you tell me. Alright, back on topic. So here, fantasy, then the magic aspect is one of the big parts. Now let's look at science fiction. Okay, before continuing, a couple comments. Reaper says, oh, we're talking fantasy tropes. I hear they have trouble keeping characters in stock. I don't exactly know what you mean by keeping characters in stock. Like, are you talking about coherence, or are you making a joke about like medieval stocks? I don't know what you're saying. Okay, anywho, science fiction. Oh, so I wanted also to bring up one of the uniting points. How is fantasy and science fiction similar? Well, they're both called sorts of speculative fiction. So let's actually look up that term really quick, speculative fiction, and see what is said about that. So, speculative fiction is a broad category of fiction encompassing genres with elements that do not exist in reality, recorded history, nature, or the present universe. Such fiction covers various themes in the context of supernatural, futuristic, and other imaginative realms. The genres under this umbrella category include, but are not limited to, science fiction, fantasy, horror, superhero fiction, alternate history, utopia and dystopia fiction, and supernatural fiction, as well as combinations thereof. So, sci-fi, fantasy, all fall under this speculative fiction, and I think we could highlight that I would basically say most of the popular reading and stuff that people are told to look at, or that people choose to look at themselves, seeking entertainment and stuff, generally falls under this umbrella of speculative fiction. Alright. So let's look here. Science fiction. It has been called the literature of ideas, and it often explores the potential consequences of scientific, social, and technological innovations. So, actually, let me pull up this one channel I've showed here before. So, like this guy on YouTube, this Isaac Arthur fellow. How does he describe himself? This channel focuses on exploring concepts in science, with an emphasis on futurism and space exploration, along with a healthy dose of science fiction. So I think that this channel is pretty, well, it's a pretty compact representation of what a lot of sci-fi is about. So if you just want to, like, extract money from sci-fi nerds and create, like, a science fiction plot, well, you could just go here and harvest these different ideas. So what sort of stuff might people talk about in sci-fi land? The Fermi paradox. Are we alone? Are there no aliens? Or, are there limitless millions and millions difference of alien species? can colonizing space save Earth, belligerent aliens, folding space, spaceports, trash-eating robots like that Disney WALL-E movie, and then like exploring particular technology, so fusion propulsion. What would fusion propulsion look like? How would that play out? So sci-fi, and then also you get this big blurring of what you might call like openly speculative fiction versus stuff that is actually presented as kind of factual. It's blurred. You can't clearly pick it apart together because people come up with these theoretical constructs saying like, oh, we know the cosmos is this way, therefore theoretically this technology is possible. And then they use their imaginations to come up with all of these stories telling you about how the future might look. And for some reason, they really can't get their graphics for like making globes and stuff look convincing. They can't get them very good, considering we supposedly have actual photographs of this sort of stuff. The look and feel of this stuff is often surprisingly unconvincing. But, you know, plasma rays and beams and stuff like that. Interesting. Alright, Reaper says, okay, he was referring to stock characters in fiction. And Reaper says, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, directly led to D&D, which led to most computer games, which now is leading the metaverse. Okay, cool. So we have a good connection here by Reaper talking about how this speculative fiction genres of like fantasy, Lord of the Rings, has directly been, you could say, there's a direct connection of ideas you could find that go through all this stuff. So this is a good point. Let's actually transition to the point I have here. So one of the big things about speculative fiction and stuff is telling people that, generally speaking, this thing called imagination is really good and you should like space out and use your imagination. And like I'll play this famous clip from SpongeBob that shows talk of imagination.
Television? Not as long as we have our imagination.
Okay, so a lot of people know about this particular SpongeBob clip, and it's funny, like it's relatable because people have been talking about imagination. Like for me, all my childhood growing up, imagination talk everywhere.
With imagination, I can be anything I want. A pirate. Arr. A football player. Hop.
A starfish.
Hop.
So based Patrick the Starfish there knows how to use his imagination. So imagination all over the place. And just one more area where you could see that sort of stuff really trending. It's like Walt Disney here, they call their engineer people, they call them Imagineers, because they use their imagination to build stuff. So they make the impossible possible. They use their imaginations, and then where innovation and storytelling combine to bring Disney stories, characters, and worlds to life. So, you know, they sit around, they use their imaginations, they come up with fake stuff, and then their job is centered around creating the illusion that fake stuff is real. So, okay, approaching and just thinking about imagination, like we are here on this stream, then it's kind of like, well, what's the point of having kids and stuff concentrate so much on imagination? Does this do anybody any good? Is it just fun? Is it the case that like kids don't know how to have fun, so we have to encourage them to use their imaginations to have fun? Like what is this all about? And I'll add here that there's a lot of traditional like Christian teachings that warn against using imagination, and also against things like idle talk, speculation, because of course if you start to tell yourself a lie again and again, you use your imagination in the wrong way, then what you're doing is you're going to start basing your actions off a lie rather than a truth. So you make up like a story about how the world works, and if the world doesn't work that way, and then you start acting on that delusion of how you are using your imagination to tell yourself how the world is. I mean, isn't that the definition of a crazy person? If you're basing what you're doing, basing your actions about what isn't, so you're actively following the lie, you're actively following deception. Yet you could see how what is the vector by which a lot of imagination stuff comes to people these days. It's like, oh yeah, it's just fun, it's just, yeah, using your imagination is good. Look at all these cool images and stuff. Whereas like for thousands and thousands of years, people have been warning against that sort of stuff. All right, George says, are exoplanets real or just a setting for science fiction? So we could look really quick at what exoplanets are. And let's just appreciate this for a second, that one of the things about imagination and all this stuff is like, we could have all these little knowledge tidbits about all these things that might not even be real, right? Because using imagination, you could come up with endless numbers of terms and different things. And if you spend your time like learning about, like if I could name all the exoplanets, like what good does that do me? All right, let's look at exoplanets.nasa.gov. Let's look at our official science fiction. Oh, I was going to read the title, but then the screen changed. All right, dress up your digital backgrounds. Ever felt stuck in a black hole of a meeting? Or maybe you just want to get light years away with travel scenes to the most exotic locations in our galaxy? So they offer you some little artworks to enjoy getting away. So they hire some graphic designers. These are all like digital paintings. So the business of imagination. Then they got some numbers. They claim to have 3,890 confirmed exoplanets. So what are exoplanets? Is that like planets that humans are supposed to be able to settle? What is an exoplanet? An exoplanet is a planet outside our solar system, usually orbiting another star. They are sometimes called extrasolar planets. Extra implying they're outside our solar system. Okay, so they don't even have to be, it's not about human habitability or something, it's just planets outside our solar system. And then they have a nice airbrush looking image here that they're showing us. Mimtel says, all the images the noose is accustomed to construct are fantasy and imagination, not the truth. The image created by the imagination are due to sickness of the noose, not its purity. Saint Isaac the Syrian. All right, let us bring up this big brain word for those who have never heard of the noose. Might be something you're interested in taking a look at. I'm not qualified to talk about the noose, but this is just to say that people have been talking for a long time, not just about like, oh, is consciousness just an illusion? People have been talking about what nowadays what a lot of stuff would fall under cognitive science, psychology, all these different topics. People have been talking about for a long time, though the language that they'll use will be different. So this quote here that Mimtel is sharing about the noose is talking about, yes, how fantasy and imagination, right, not the truth. And admittedly so, when you're coming up with speculative fiction, right, these people that come up and make speculative fiction, they're not lying to you at all. They're like, we're just going to, use our imagination and come up with all sorts of ideas, make up all these things and present this. And Right. So to dwell on those images, to explore them further, what does that do to a person? It's I think rightly pointed out. It's it's playing with some pretty dangerous stuff. And let me just look to another popular culture reference here. So that recently this movie Inception came out, and the premise of this Inception movie was how an idea could be super powerful, right? You implant some sort of idea, just some little kernel in somebody, and then this could have them do very, very, very big things. So in the same way, when we talk about fantasy, sci-fi, stuff like this, it's dealing with pretty big, major things that could really impact how a person lives their life. You might just start thinking of it as fun and games, but as films like Inception explore, right, you just have some idea, and then what could this idea blossom into? What could it become? It's like a seed that you plant, and then the seed sprouts up. What happens to it? Likewise, you could read literature exploring, like, how does, a person, they have a little bit of resentment, and then how does that resentment lead somebody eventually to do something like commit murder or something that maybe at first they would never consider how they would do that, but by just letting like a little thing take root, then lo and behold, you could have all this stuff happening. Right, Reaper says, what's the connection to anti-imagination and Christianity? Is there background that this was actually promoted? Seems a lot of creative stuff came out of all those countries, for example, churches, acting as patrons for artists during the Renaissance. Okay, yeah, so let's just extend our discussion of imagination more broadly here. I was looking at the Wikipedia page for imagination, so let's look at a definition for it. So imagination, it's something we could do. So let's look at a definition we could just work with. Imagination is the ability to produce and simulate novel objects, sensations, and ideas in the mind without immediate input of the senses. So I think Reaper here, he's making a concrete example here. A concrete example, no pun intended, where like you could say, okay, well, we need to use imagination. For instance, if you're making a building, so the stones actually aren't laid in place yet, right? But then you'll use the faculties, the powers of your imagination in order to know, to see, envision, imagine, right, where all the bricks and stuff are put into place before you actually do it, right? So imagination, it's an ability that people have, and I would say it seems like different people to different extent have different degrees of imagination power. I'll bring up an interesting example. So I've mentioned Elon Musk, and then there was this biography on Elon Musk I read. So I'll pull it up, this book. So one interesting tidbit I remember from this book is the author, Ashley Vance, was describing how one of the reasons Elon Musk knew he was big-brained was he could like envision in his head objects, and he could do various transformations on them. So let's actually, we're going to have a pretty cutting-edge Allen stream here. I'm gonna pull up some advanced software. So let us get a visualization for what imagination is like. So I'm actually going to pull up the 3D software Blender here. So this is Blender. It's a 3D art application. Hopefully it doesn't lag too much with tons of programs running. But like, so one example in which you could do like imagination push-ups or something is like if you're here, you have an object and you could like rotate a cube in your mind, all right? So cube is like level 1. You have certain imagination powers. If you could like make this image in your head and manipulate the cube, okay? That's like imagination level 1. Now let us add something more complex. Let's add the blender monkey. So a cube, not that complicated. Here's the monkey, right? Now on the other hand, it would take a little bit more advanced imagination foo to be able to like envision and rotate this monkey in your head. So different people, right, they might have different degrees, powers of imagination. And I think now that I have it up, like 3D software like Blender or even Minecraft or Roblox, whatever you're talking about, these things, maybe you could say that they're pretty good representative examples of like what it is that imagination is and what you could do. Using like this 3D software, you could just imagine something, and then provided you put in the time and you have the skill to do the stuff, then you could make things. Like, you know, let's just pretend like I'm an evil 3D artist. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, there's a monkey. Let's make a demon monkey. So we could do that on stream. Let's make a demon monkey on screen. How would you do that? You would add horns to the monkey. You do this. Look, I could get hired to make an NFT because for some reason they seem to really want creepy satanic art. So you could. Oh, look, I made an NFT. Look, an evil monkey. Whoa, you know. So what do people do with their imagination, with the powers that they have? What are the images? What are the things that they create, given the abilities and gifts that they have? Well, you could look at what sort of stuff is popular in art and media, and as we continue to do on this stream, and yes, you too could join the legions of the pattern recognizers. We could see all the pattern recognition, all the patterns repeating themselves again and again. Okay, so very roundabout way to answer Reaper's question here, which is to say, like I wouldn't say that Christians are anti-imagination, in the sense that you don't tell people to use your imagination at all. But you could look at how there's a clear difference between like using your faculties of imagination to like build a city, to do some sort of useful work, versus the often like purely speculative functions a person could use their imagination for. So imagination, it's a very powerful ability you have. It's just like people have hands and people have eyes, and you could use your eyes, your hands, your mouth, these things that you're given. Your body isn't evil, but you could abuse and use the powers that you have. So the imagination, maybe you could talk about it as like a particular mental capability that people have. And just as there are temptations to do like bad things with your hands or your eyes or your tongue, in the same way people might have temptations to use their imagination in dangerous ways. So I think like an equivalent example of this would be, like, I'll just say for myself, I don't own any guns. I don't have any like weapons of that kind. And it's just like it's easier. My life is easier in that way. You know, if I had a family and stuff, maybe I would have to protect people. Then maybe it would be appropriate for me to have those things potentially. But for just me and myself, like I don't have anything. And one of the reasons would be because if I did own and I did practice and use something like that, then it could be a potential liability for me. So it might actually be disadvantageous for it to be known, for me to register and everyone to know that I have the ability to use and act with that sort of thing, rather than being like a strength for me. It like my own personal opinion for me in my life right now is it's actually advantageous for me to just not get involved with that sort of thing at all. So I would say equivalently, just talking about imagination, right? As a very conservative position, somebody might say, like, just don't go wander off and be, like, don't treat your imagination like it's nothing. It'd be better to just rein it in and not use your imagination, because if you abuse this and you don't know what you're doing, then perhaps it could actually end up causing you a lot of harm. You know, before you know it, you might be like a cybersecurity furry expert on the internet, getting paid six figures to keep the internet running, but at the price of being a furry. And maybe that's not a price that you would want to pay if you could think about it and consider from the beginning of your journey. You would say, like, okay, no, that cost is not worth it. That's not something I would want to see happen. But if you just hop on a path and run, you know, who knows where it will take you. So I would say that the anti-imagination stuff, it's like guarded caution, right? It'd just be like the gun example that I gave. Like, for a lot of people, it would just be better not to have them put themselves in a potentially compromising situation. Okay. Reaper says, okay, so let's see. All right, no new comments, but I think so I answered the question about why, right, you might be kind of anti-imagination in the sense that it's a very powerful thing that you have to be careful guarding and using it. However, it could be a very useful and powerful thing if applied for the proper reasons. Okay. So let's look at sci-fi really quick. So sci-fi and fantasy, I think the speculative fiction term was a useful one to show how these two genres are united in many ways. And we could look at the history of science fiction, and I'm going to pull up the Wikipedia article and take a look at when science fiction became, you could say, like its own thing, right? When did science fiction come to differentiate itself to become different from other types of speculative fiction? So I'm just going to skip down to, let's start at the 19th century here. So a representative example here, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So in what way was like this Frankenstein novel, how was this science fiction? The short novel featured the archetypal mad scientist experimenting with advanced technology. So maybe that's one of the key things, where technology of some kind, as opposed to just unexplained magic, is the driving force. Right, so this person says the first seminal work to which the label SF can be logically attached. Let's see. Okay, I think here too, this might be another defining feature. So the alien as antagonist, furnishing a view of the human condition from an outside perspective. So in the Frankenstein novel, then there's this monster that's created that could view like the scientists, the experimenting people, as like not a human born in the same way, but an intelligent being that is able to see everybody. Okay, Reaper says, sounds like you just want to promote Christian values and stop non-Christian things. I'm not sure talking about anti-imagination succinctly communicates what you really care about. I mean, I'm overtly, yes, I am promoting the Christian values, the Christian position. Like I say that's what I believe in. That's what I'm going for. But what I'm saying about like speculative fiction and stuff like that is that these things, they could be harmful. Like it's like saying to somebody, be careful playing with fire. You might burn yourself. So it's not just like hating on something to hate on something. Instead, I'm trying to say, like, there are reasons why a lot of people in the past have taught to be cautious of these things, to be careful with them, because if you do mess around with them, then you're going to bring a lot of pain upon yourself eventually. And I'll just say, like, one thing about speculative fiction, this sort of thing, like diving into a world, going into something really deep that's speculative fiction, sure, you get your reward like right then and there, and that it could be fun. So it's a kind of like escapism, but it would be the same way, like, there's no argument about, like, I'm going to bring out an example that's pretty, you'll probably say it's not a fair comparison, but like, I'm sure that, like, doing heroin, like, feels good and it's fun in a sense, and that it's a very potent drug. It's a powerful thing, but you would not tell somebody to do that, and you wouldn't tell somebody to get more involved with it if they had already had some exposure to it, because you would look at that and say, getting more involved with this, toying with this thing, it's going to hurt you in the end, so please don't do it. So yeah, going along what Reaper says is, yeah, I am promoting the Christian perspective on these things, and one of the reasons is because I hope to convey useful information to all as viewers, and I say a lot of this stuff too from experience. So how have I used or wasted my time in speculative fiction and imagination? Like, one of the reasons I'm talking about this is because, like, growing up, going through school and stuff, people would tell me, oh yeah, reading is good, you should read a bunch of books, and so on and so forth. So what did I do? I actually did what people told me to, right? I actually went ahead and I read a lot of books, watched stuff, thought about the messages, the meanings of the books, and right then, I don't know, did I come out okay? But at the end of all of that, right, then I'm just saying, like, look, I spent a lot of time in this stuff, and if I had to tell somebody what I thought of all of it after having spent a bunch of time doing that sort of stuff, then I'm just saying, like, don't waste your time in speculation and stuff. Instead, it could actually, if you stay away from it, in a lot of cases, I think it's actually better, because it ends up being a big time, money, attention sink, and could be damaging to you. So I am overtly saying, like, yeah, don't do this, and giving that position, because that's what I would tell myself. Reaper says, going along with this train of thought, and in reference to some previous streams, why not connect the potential downside of imagination or speculative fiction, and decrease in organized religion? So here's part of the interesting cultural analysis too, that I think continues to bring people with different viewpoints than me to this stream. So I'll thank you too, Reaper, for giving me some pushback and making things a bit more lively and spicy here. So I'll agree with you descriptively to say that, especially, so I'm talking about America, the United States, because that's where I've grown up, that's the place I know the best. The rise of fantasy and science fiction, I would say, uncoincidentally, has accompanied the decrease in organized religion in the United States. And that's why I'm saying it's kind of like an alternative religion. So in the United States, you don't have so much organized religion and stuff for a lot of people, or you have like very loose organized religion, and then what arises in its place, Marvel Funko Pops. that's what arises in its place. Marvel Funko Pop. Reaper says, the U.S. Okay, so why not connect the potential downside of imagination or speculative fiction and decrease in organized religion in the U.S. with the rise of superheroes, comics, and thus internet subgenres related to them, and finally the metaverse. Right. Okay, so Reaper, good observation, good point here. So this is exactly what I'm saying, in that, so in the United States, a lot of the speculative fiction stuff has arisen as the default culture. The default there's a moral teaching, there's all sorts of stuff that comes with this as an alternative to what I will argue is the Christian worldview. So I think that my belief is the Christian worldview is the correct one, but in the United States, the Christian worldview is not the dominant, most popular one. Instead, the sort of you could say it's a kind of plurality, a kind of it's an anything but, right? So all these subgenres, all these different directions that people might go into, right? It's kind of saying, use your imagination. The possibilities are literally endless for all these different stories and things that you could come up with, and you could choose like any of these things. So when you're saying like encourage kids to use their imagination to think about all these things, it doesn't actually really matter about the specifics of what they come up with, right? It's just cast the net really wide and find your own little niche. And why do I think that this isn't good? Well, like in the last stream here, I was talking about how one of the effects could be that if people aren't coming together for one thing that could happen is that people get spread out, that they become isolated, they become alone, they draw away from each other, they kind of collapse into metaverse solipsism. And it's a natural consequence, I think, of taking a lot of these ideas I'm saying are bad ideas to their logical conclusion. Reaper says, do you suggest I throw away my sriracha and sushi and adopting an English peasant's diet of meat pies and boiled root vegetables? Yeah, so I don't know the degree to which you're joking here, but I think there's some stuff that we could talk about how it's purely just like form, aesthetics, like different cultures might have like different clothes, different foods, stuff like that, and I think that's all good and fine. But when you have something like some sort of particular teaching, some idea, then it's just like this inception bit I mentioned here, that then it's important, I think, to take a look at it very seriously. If you choose to eat like sushi versus a burrito, at the end of the day, it's pretty inconsequential. It doesn't matter. But if you choose to say like, I'm gonna live my life assuming Harry Potter is real, versus I'm gonna live my life assuming like Harry Potter isn't real, I mean, I don't think we would tell somebody to live their life assuming like that they could become a wizard or something. Or rather, I would say, maybe somebody can become a wizard, but is that a path you want to go down? So, yes, not being a uniculture, everyone fall into line and assimilate to one particular form, but when we're looking at ideas with universal application, then I think that there is more at stake, more at stake than choosing between beef and lamb. You see what I did there? All right, let's continue going down here a bit. Okay, so fantasy and SF, they're very similar in that they're both species of speculative fiction. And I think then it's no surprise that we get these genres, like I'm talking about cyberpunk here, where you're blending the science fiction and the fantasy genres, and they naturally come together, I think a lot of the times in aesthetics movements. So I brought up this aesthetics wiki before. But one of the big characteristics of this cyberpunk is, of course, you have technology and all this stuff everywhere, but then you also have some pretty big philosophical themes baked in. So we could take a look at some of the representative images. One of them being like this idea of uploading your consciousness, or sort of transcending matter, I think is one of the big there's a lot of plot around artificial intelligence and transcending matter, so I wouldn't find what I was looking for there. But if you look at like the Ghost in the Shell anime, that's one of the big themes. No spoilers here, where it's like this protagonist character. The story is centered around how she actually has this artificial body, so she doesn't feel and perceive stuff in the same way. But then with her new body, then she's much more strong. She could just like jump off buildings and do all this sort of stuff. So one of the driving aspects of this is this kind of transhumanist mysticism sort of stuff, where it's saying using technology and stuff, we could transcend these normal limits that are imposed upon us. And then the series explores like what are a lot of the implications of having these blurred lines between human and machine. Blurred lines between human and machine is a big theme in cyberpunk. I don't think that's a very far-fetched thing to say. Reaper says, type Frodo Lives 1960s into Google. Alright, Reaper, I'm going to try this out. Let's see what happens. 1960s. What is this about? Okay, we're learning about hippies. This is interesting. Okay, Frodo Lives was a popular countercultural slogan in the 1960s and 1970s, referring to the character Frodo Baggins in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, commonly associated with the hippie movement. So what is the meaning of this? So it looks like this memed. I think, let's see. The phrase was frequently in graffiti, buttons, bumper stickers, t-shirts, and other materials. It was the title of a 1967 single released under the band name The Magic Ring by Smash Records. It was later displayed during the activation of a computer virus in the early 1990s. Alright, you found an intersection between fantasy and sci-fi here with Frodo Lives. But what does it mean? It appeared places. Okay, well, it's not immediately clear to me what it means, so I'll leave that. Maybe a hippie will post in the comments later and reveal to us. But yeah, that might actually be. So if we look, maybe I'll say like predecessors to memes or something as a future topic, to say you get some pattern that just reproduces all over that might take a very specific form. We could look maybe at how like Frodo Lives might be a predecessor to what we see as meme, the May culture on the interwebs. I'll make a note of that. Okay, Reaper says, did you not read the last book? Rutro, we found Alan just watches the movies. I actually did read Lord of the Rings. It was a long time ago, so admittedly I don't remember this one line. I'll actually say about, so one thing that I've done with reading a lot of books is I would actually read various books, like, kind of in a vacuum, so to speak. So I would just read the book on its own terms, see what the book is about, not like seeing the movie first. So I would have the idea that, okay, I want to know what this book is really about. So I'm just going to read the book straight and not read like summaries and things about it before. So actually within the past few years, I read all the Harry Potter books, because basically this is when I was searching and trying to figure out stuff to do next. I was thinking like, well, maybe it'll make it easier for me to relate to other millennials if I read something like Harry Potter, and I could understand the millennial mind a little bit better. I don't know, maybe I'll meet a nice girl that really likes Harry Potter, and we'll be a good match or something. So I went and I read through all the Harry Potters. Some of them I even read in Spanish, just to practice Spanish, but I hadn't seen all the movies. I've seen some of the movies, and I wasn't like talking with other people and getting all sorts of opinions about Harry Potter. So I just read through all the Harry Potter books to see, like, what exactly is this Harry Potter? Is it really as great as a lot of people make it out to be, or is it what is it? So I dove in and I read all the Harry Potter. There's a joke that Harry Potter is kind of like liberal theology. So yes, I read all the liberal theology by studying Harry Potter, and clearly I'm not super impressed by Harry Potter, by the content of this stream, but that's to say that one of the reasons I'm talking about this topic and presenting this information here is because people might say to do something like, oh, read books, it's good, imagination. And then, like, one of my credentials is I've actually, like, followed through and done, like, memes that people have said. So people would be like, oh, yeah, read Harry Potter, it's great. Then I'll be like, okay, I'll read Harry Potter. And then I actually went through and I read Harry Potter. Or, like, how did I get into technology and web programming? Well, there was this meme that was like, learn to code. So I was like, okay, I will learn to code. And then I actually, I did go out and I learned to code. And then, we'll have more fun talking about computers, coding, and all sorts of stuff. But just to say that doing actually a lot of the stuff that you could say, broadly speaking, media messaging told me to do, then I'm just giving my own views, having actually followed through and done some of these things. All right. Reaper says, well, that pattern of X lives is called a snow clone. Reaper says, Alan reads books before seeing what the internet says about them. Right. Not all the time, though. Not all the time. So, like, for example, in this stream, if I pull up a movie summary or something, then it could be I didn't even bother watching the movie, or I just watched a preview. But we could still talk about how something was popular or its significance. Reaper says, Harry Potter is just a more modern World War II child story. In World War II, they send all the children on trains without parents to the country away from German bombs in London. This spawned endless books. Yeah, I read like the Narnia books too, C.S. Lewis, and I think sending children away to boarding school and stuff with wartime things was a recurring thing there. Oh, and then Reaper gives that example of C.S. Lewis, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's a British meme trope like meat pies. Okay, Mimtol says, the Imagineer tends to assume there is no inherent value or meaning in reality given. The world is thought to be open to rearrangement or reinvention. And then there's a disregard for the idea of creation. By creation here meaning, like, God made the world this way. That would be like Christians believe God made the world in a particular way. And for example, we say humans are made in the image and likeness of God. So one of the reasons why say you don't murder people is because in any other person, right, you don't hate your fellow man they're all people, and we all share in the same human condition. Whereas on the other hand, we could look at how stuff like, what's it called? Yeah, like let's look at transhumanism. So transhumanism is like it's a non-Christian worldview, non-Christian philosophy, because the focus of like a lot of this transhumanism stuff is talking about how what it means to be a human isn't fixed, right? It's not fixed human machine. Is there what it means to be human? The transhumanist answer could be maybe there once was, but now there isn't anymore. And we too could look at how even like some sort of fantasy stuff, right? So another common feature of a lot of fantasy and sci-fi genre is that you're going to have all these different species. So let's just bring up an example like Star Wars alien species. Okay, so I'm just bringing up Star Wars because I've watched my share of Star Wars, so I'll at least be familiar with some of these. So another feature of sci-fi fantasy a lot of the times is you'll have intelligences that aren't just humans, and it might not be like, so like Christians, for example, there are angels, right, that are also intelligences, and I think you would say like demons too, as fallen angels, they would also be intelligences. But there's like a finite number and hierarchy of intelligences. Whereas one of the big themes with the like fantasy and sci-fi view of the world is that there's unlimited possibilities for the different forms and types of intelligences that you could have. So in Star Wars, there's some pretty memorable aliens. Oh, this list isn't so easy to navigate, but I was thinking like if you were to know some Star Wars aliens, right, you might know about here, like the Jawas, these guys that are like desert robot collectors, and they got their little monolith here. We have the Wookiees. Those are the hairy ones. So this is site's called Wikipedia, named after the Wookiees. Maybe they're on the next page. You could just pull up some Wookiees. But, right, so as a sort of genre-defining thing, fantasy and sci-fi will often have, like, alternative competing forces. So it's not like there's just humans, people, and people are special in some way. Instead, there's all sorts of alternatives, and you might even have robots, machines. So like one of the main characters in Star Wars, for example, or maybe not main, but recognizable characters is like this alien, this golden robot C-3PO, who the young Anakin Skywalker built as a genius boy. So in the Star Wars universe, you don't even start to ask questions like, what is the soul? What is the meaning of life? Because you just look out and there's all these diversities of what you could call life forms, intelligences. They all have their unique characteristics. And then you could ask, like, what is the meaning in this universe? Is there good? Is there bad? What are people trying to do? Like, is the goal of life, let's just hypothetically, to like start a family? Well, like robots don't start families. Maybe they start factories, because the ways in which people might reproduce and stuff, it could be very different between different species, right? Is the goal for everybody to be assimilated and efficient? I would say in Star Wars, maybe that's why you have the Empire in Star Wars. They're the bad guys. And the image of the Empire in Star Wars is that they're just this like evil, impersonal looking empire, right? They're as opposed to like all the fun different, do you like C-3PO, Jawas, and Wookiees, and like all this diversity, these nice things? Or are you like the evil empire that just wants everybody to assimilate, and all you care about is raw, unrestrained power? So in the world of Star Wars, you're presented with a kind of opposition like this. On the one hand, you have the bad guys who are obsessed with order and power and just want to smash everything together. And then on the other side, you have like a pretty goofy plurality where, like, how do you define the good guys in Star Wars? That they're against the Empire, basically, but besides that, what makes them better or different from the Empire? I mean, certainly they both kill each other, right? So it's not like one of them is like peaceful and doesn't hurt the others, and the other is, they're using the same weapons against each other. Reaper says, it's important to point out there is a huge difference between a small group of people that believe in some core documents related to transhumanism versus a much larger amount of people that just kind of believe humans might kind of meld with some technology as inevitable. That is to say, one might be prescriptive while the later is more speculative and thus not a value judgment per se. There's a huge debate about how you might call humans cyborgs today because they're connected to their smartphones. Yeah, so going off that, like, I'll bring up something I've looked at, the extended mind idea. We could talk briefly about that. So what does it matter if the smartphone becomes a chip inside the brain in 20 years? Clearly it's different, but maybe the big step happened for better or worse. Lord of the Rings is fantasy and Star Trek is science fiction. Why is Star Wars science fiction instead of science fantasy instead of science fiction? You're talking about how the Empire looked in Star Wars. It's specifically referencing Germany in the 1930s. Yeah, so just I'll build off this point really quick about the Empire in Star Wars. So in the Empire in Star Wars, you could look at the colors that are used. Red, black, and white. Red, black, and white pasted all over. And of course, this looks like, Mustache Man and Mustache Man's army. They also use those colors. And as I understand it, these colors are big with like occultist type people. So if I just search, like red, black, white, meaning, then, well, I probably need a better search query, but I'll just make the assertion that this red, black, and white found together is commonly used with all sorts of spooky imagery of various sorts, and so it's no coincidence that in Star Wars the aesthetics for the evil empire is borrowing that. Yeah, we could even look at let's look at a Masonic floor. Then that'll be red and black. But then also too, you could see around here, you could see the red carpet. So red, white, black, and then red, white, black here too. Red, white, black. They got their altar thing. Red, white, black. So the imagery and stuff is non-coincidental. I'll put it that way. Yeah. Okay, so, and then I'll answer Reaper's other point here. So even looking at the distinctions between science fiction and fantasy, yeah, I think, like, for example, in Star Wars, they don't actually explain very much, right? So there's like the Force, and it's kind of just like magic, basically. So maybe Star Wars might more aptly be called like a space fantasy than a kind of science fiction. But maybe it gets grouped in sort of science fiction for the reasons that various technologies and things like that are one of the defining characteristics of its aesthetics, like these giant walker things and like in Star Wars, the Clone War, of course, to have like a clone army to make all these soldiers that look the same, and so on and so forth. So certain technologies, you could say, are driving factors in Star Wars, but it's not like, I think the term is like hard science fiction or something, and that not much care is taken to explain these things. Yeah, so like in Star Wars, they have a droid army. Like here's cloud computing coming to shoot you. These ant-looking aliens, the battle droids, they're all running at you. That's the cloud. The cloud doesn't like you. Then you get these. But right, maybe Star Wars is more fantasy like. I think though that, so going back to the main unifying factor here, I think that in general this idea of speculative fiction as being a more broad umbrella term connecting like fantasy and science fiction it's a useful term to say that the lines are not always clear between science fiction and fantasy. And then maybe like one thing about Star Wars, why would it be sci-fi? Well, it's not overtly using like medieval castles and stuff. So you could say it's as opposed to your classical fantasy type stuff that's sort of thrown back to medieval Europe or Asia or something in some form. Star Wars doesn't really do that. Okay, Reaper says Star Wars aesthetic is similar to the Lord of the Rings world, and that you prominently see large statues of structures from the ancients or bygone eras when things were better or different. Yeah, I think too. This is a that is a interesting theme to bring up too. So I'll add that to future topics. I'll add ancients and lost civilization type plot lines and stories and stuff. Of course, a famous example of this is that of Atlantis, like bringing back Atlantis. And then what is let's look at the website for ancient aliens. I think it's like History Channel or someone. But yes, where does fantasy come to meet science fiction? Well, it comes to meet by the pyramids with ancient aliens, where the technology for the future is brought by ancient aliens. I just want to see some cool pictures. Topics. Oh, this is just history general. I just want to see some sci-fi images. Okay, we'll skip over to Atlantis. Yes, but so this idea of an ancient, highly technologically advanced society, it's been memeing for a really long time. So Atlantis, right? It's supposed to be a lost, very technologically advanced society, but for some reason it was lost under the sea. So yes, that's an appropriate connection that Reaper's bringing up here. Reaper says, I guess maybe you almost have to have fantasies set in such an aesthetic, otherwise all your protagonists would just be in a classroom learning calculus. Yeah, so I haven't watched the latest the Dune movie, but I know of the basic premise of Dune. And I think that one of the things that they're doing in Dune is they're overtly bringing in this sort of spirituality, religious aspect into a discussion, a story, a narrative about like technology and stuff. So it's science fiction in a sense that it's about technology and consequences of technology and stuff like that. But then Dune, one of the reasons it's such a popular, deep work that a lot of people continue to be interested in is because Dune also brings in how like ritual, religion, spirituality, belief and stuff also is inseparable from talking about the forms that various civilizations choose, and of course the choices that individuals make. You cannot really separate them. Ripper says, it's also very common in books and video games for the protagonist to be a young male with no familial obligations, so they could adventure without risking their family's well-being. I actually heard something similar about that. Like, astronauts are oftentimes they're bachelors and stuff, so if they die, there's no family. Let's see, astronaut, bachelor, background. I don't know what to search. It's a bachelor's degree. Let's look at how to become an astronaut. Let's look at the how do you become one? So originally they were all pilots, but not anymore. A lot of military background. Anyways, we don't have to look into this now, but I think Reaper does make a good point here too, that oftentimes the protagonists, they're a sort of unknown, isolated individual. So I'll bring up really quick, in Halo, the Halo protagonist, I think Master Chief. Where does Master Chief come from? I think he was like an orphan or something. He just came out of, and then he was trained as a Spartan. So let's see where he came from. So he had his parents born on some colony. Alright, too much lore. But I think that, there is a theme, though, with a lot of science fiction of people that are brought up kind of within a very strict structure, particularly if there's like a kind of military aspect involved. It's like a soldier that has a prime loyalty to some organization, some duty to whether it's their planet, their commander, something like that. And they're raised in a sort of isolated, very controlled environment. But by being raised in a very isolated and controlled environment, then they're able to become more efficient, more powerful, more strong than somebody that, like Alan, the casual civilian, right? Alan, the casual civilian, lacking in discipline, kind of sloppy a lot of the time, but, like someone that comes from a much more strict upbringing and stuff, then they would be much more better positioned to act efficiently and respond to the call of duty. Okay, Mimtol says, usually the parents are dead or killed. Almost always the mother is dead. And then it kind of sets the Gnostic tone, inherent flaw in reality. Yeah, so I think if we just look at a bunch of plots, like we could look at some time, like let's consider like Batman, for instance, right? The premise of Batman is that Batman, like billionaire Bruce Wayne, his parents were victims of murder, and then this young boy, brought up by like his butler Alfred guy and stuff, his job is saying, there's this injustice in the world, so how does he use the special position that he's given? That's why he's the protagonist, right? He is in some sort of special position. How does he use this position or platform that he has in order to make the world a more just place or something like that? So similarly, too, right, with a lot of these science fiction plots, it's like a special individual is put into a situation where actually they're given a lot of power, a lot of control. Get in the robot, Shinji. Sorry, I'm making an anime reference. But just to go off this idea that there is, there's a common recurring theme with a lot of sci-fi and fantasy of kind of young, unprepared hero is put up to a task that is bigger than what they expect. You know, you have to answer to the call of duty to do something. And the plot for a lot of sci-fi and fantasy is going to revolve around how the protagonist responds to this situation. And it could be, right, they're put in this situation where it's like, you know, am I being a good guy by piloting this robot? Am I being a bad guy? Is there any meaning? Does it matter? I don't know. I just have to do the thing, right? A lot of I think that's how a lot of sci-fi fantasy sort of stuff feels, especially like the Japanese, for whatever reason. They're very into moral ambiguity and stuff. Let's see. Reaper says, the familial obligation thing is also related to the younger, not the first, that would not inherit family wealth and thus have to strike out on their own. Many wars or conflicts in IRL history caused by this. Yeah, that could be a good point too. And I'll bring this up, like with the space stuff. A common plot element as well is if you're going to a colony or something, oftentimes it's a last-ditch effort, right? So it's like somebody going to become a gold miner in California during the 19th century. So this idea that, you know, you didn't make it on the main world, you need to have a second chance, something like that. So like I'll pull up in StarCraft, for instance, you have the Terran Marines. And the backstory behind the Terran Marines is that they're convicts. So you could see here he's got the chains on his feet. And then the thing is, the deal that they sign up for is that they have a Space Marine suit on them that's kind of like a prison that they always wear. So in order to be freed from prison, they have to pay their debt by being a Space Marine. So here's a Space Marine, and then of course they got some pretty sick graphics because they are the cutting edge of this sort of stuff. But yeah, he has this suit attached to him, and then thrown out into this hostile environment where you got to fight the Zergs and then the ancient civilization, the StarCraft Protoss. So this goes along too with this whole idea of like ancient civilizations. The Protoss are kind of like the religious conservative faction, I guess, in the StarCraft world, and that they're defending like an old way of doing things. And they're caught up in all sorts of conflicts and schism and stuff. And then there's the humans, and then there's the Zerg, the bug monster things. Okay, Reaper says, speaking of Batman, the Dark Knight back when story where Bruce Wayne goes on a quest to Tibet for 7 years to study transformation is a kind of very Eastern myth addition to the more Western. Yeah, so he's like Jack Dorsey of Twitter. Okay, we're gonna add that to the Batman future topic. The white man visits the East. We'll write the topic like that. Okay, so let's flip back to the notes here. So we talked about a whole bunch, especially this imagination bit, so I won't spend too much time on the Asian bit. But Reaper here, once again, with an appropriate transition to the next topic. In this Batman series, right, Batman goes to Tibet, so he goes to what we could refer to as the Far East, as opposed to the Near East of like maybe Irania and Middle East. The Far East would be like India and East Asia. And Yeah, I think a common theme that we see all over the place with the sci-fi stuff, especially, and then also the cyberpunk, is this idea of the East, the Far East, being a kind of alternative trajectory for the West. So, we're all here, we're talking in English, we're having this conversation in what I would say is more like the West. So for a lot of times people in the West, right, if they see what's around them in reality, they don't really like what's going on. A natural place to look to see, okay, where is it better would be to turn in to look at the East and to say, like, is it better in China? So here I'm just pulling up this story from Bloomberg Quick Take, mainly just to show the aesthetics. This is showing off the Chinese city of Shenzhen, known as the electronics capital of the world. But when people are turning and looking at the East, and you're showing images of Asia, what are some of the themes for the future that maybe inspired people? I think one of them is a more peaceful and equitable society. So let me elaborate on what I mean by peaceful and equitable society. So, like, when you show a crowded street in like China or something, it's more equitable in that like everybody is kind of middle class in a sense, right? Everybody is enjoying the same spaces, the same cities. The richest and the poorest people walk the same streets and do similar things. So people might point to a place like this Batman example. If we look at a picture of like Nepal or something, then you'll probably get a picture of a lot of people in those saffron robes, sort of all doing the same sort of thing. Was it Nepal that I'm thinking of, or was it somewhere else? Anyways, I think there will often be a contrast in people's mind where it'll be like West. Okay, what happens in the West? Well, you have either you go the Europe way where you have like aristocracy, old money, this sort of thing, an endless religious schism. Or you go the kind of United States way where it's like robber baron, evil capitalists. So Europe or America, either way you go, it's very bad. By this view, whereas people will turn and they'll look at Asia. Okay, so let's search Kathmandu, and it'll be they don't have guns, so they aren't like crazy gun touting Americans. You don't want to be uncivilized like them, and then also too, they're not materialistic, and because they're doing their yoga or whatever, they're pursuing their spiritual journeys. That the people in the East, they're happier, they're more peaceful, they're orderly, and they don't have a lot of the problems that people do have in the Western world, either by a traditional European or American model. So I think oftentimes what I just described there, that'd be a disillusioned Westerner's view of Eastern civilization. So, and then associated that too, a lot of colors, good tasting food. If you want to be a vegan, of course, like the Buddhists have a lot more to say about vegan cuisine and stuff. They're not just like Beyond Meat, Impossible Burger. They got long traditions of cooking all sorts of tasty vegan dishes, things like that. So I think that the appeal of the East in many ways comes from a rejection of seeing a lot of the problems that we have in the West, the United States, hierarchical Europe, and for these reasons, then people will turn and they'll look at Far Eastern spirituality and stuff, which is seems to be quite integral to a lot of these societies, especially if you're Batman going up in the Himalayas or something. Rupert says, who is orderly? Alan doesn't know about British queuing. I only know that Japanese are really good at waiting in lines. Chinese, it's kind of like a funnel. Not so good at waiting in lines. And when I visited South Korea, I would say that people waited in line, but they also yelled at each other a lot. So if you weren't doing the right thing and you weren't acting fast enough, somebody would make sure to tell you about how you're an idiot, and then people would get in line. In Japan, they did it without the yelling, and in China, they didn't do it. So there's my experience in East Asia. I don't know about Southeast Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, some of these other places one might go to. Okay, so to just finish off this section, I think nowadays for the modern person, you look at East Asia, a lot of the time, East Asia is like a place where a lot of ideas get to happen that are slower to happen in the West. So I'll just give an example about China. So, for example, China has this thing, China Three Gorges Dam. So when Americans, a lot of typical American will think about China, they might say, like, as opposed to the United States where we have democracy, which could be inefficient, in China they're authoritarian, so they're able to pull off and do all sorts of things. So like one example of this sort of idea that you'll hear talked about with like China is they could have these massive infrastructure projects and stuff. They could, build a huge dam or something because they don't respect the same freedoms that they respect in the United States. So in the United States, we waste tons of money with legal fees, bickering about rules and laws. But this is the price of freedom in the United States, you see. Whereas in Asia, then they have another model, which is the government is authoritarian. So they're like, we want a big dam. Then they could just go ahead and make the big dam. And if you don't want the dam there, then it doesn't matter. You have to move whether you like it or not. So there's this contrast between the West, which has these institutions and things which guard, or at least in theory, they're supposed to guard and protect certain stuff, such as property rights. Then in contrast, you look at East Asia, or China in particular, then what happens in China is they will just bulldoze and do what they want. Now, one of the consequences of this is that in places like China, for example, if China wants to rebuild itself as a highly technological society, then China is able to change, to rebuild itself, to remake itself in a much more direct and quick way than in the West. And like another thing people have been talking about in China is like the so-called social credit system in China. So we won't talk about the specifics of what exactly is involved with this sort of thing. But like in the United States, if you said, we're going to launch a social credit system, then you're going to get a lot of pushback. A lot of people won't want this. But as it's presented to the West, like people will say like, oh yeah, in China, they want to do something, they want to make everybody do cashless payments and do social credit system. China is contrasted with the West in that, yeah, they just roll out, they just do this thing, whether people or not want it or not, and that's because that's the Chinese way. I might have to join a foreign policy if I want to be a real independent Fed. But for now, we're an independent think tank here on Allen Stream. We're not real Feds. Okay, Reaper says, wait in line, yell at each other. Sounds like super H smart. Okay, so sounds like Reaper has been to this Korean market. Yeah, so they do wait in line, but it is not chill and quiet. That was my experience in South Korea. Reaper says, speaking of China, can you discuss the role or similarities that fiction has to state propaganda or to revisionist history? Okay, we could maybe this stream, not in this stream, but I'll add that to the list. State propaganda revisionist history. We could talk about that. We could talk about that, treat that explicitly in another stream, but we will. I'll try to mention. We still got some room to go, so we'll touch these things. Okay. So I think, yeah, we covered the main topic here. So science fiction, fantasy, and then punks, cyberpunk, and junks, the East Asian stuff. Not an extremely organized look, but you could see how all these topics are related, and it's not surprising how we see in very like different authors, different places, the same themes and tropes come up together. Like there's similarities between like Batman visiting like India or East Asia, and then we could look at like Star Wars or something, and we could find a lot of similarities in the storytelling, the approach that's going on. All right, there was... Okay, a lot of interesting stuff we could go over. Here's like someone mentioned this anime. That was very bizarre. Vivi Fluorite's Eye Song. So there's like an AI. Its mission is to make everybody happy through music. And then you have a blend, an interesting blend of fantasy, medieval type Europe. And then like it's about AI. Look. The aim to reach a future where both humans and AIs are equal. So it's an anime talking about how humans and AIs, they shouldn't be at war with each other. They should get along. And then it's set in a kind of medieval European looking setting. But it's made by Japanese people. Here you could see one eye that's like camera digital stuff. And then you have some magic girl looking people. And then the wires of the cyberpunk. You get the heads-up display interface. One day I want to deliver a song to a large crowd of people. いつか多くの人に歌を届けたい. You get a weird robot. I think that the robot bear thing is like the engineer that made the AI maybe transferred his consciousness or something. Anyways, AIs, humans, destroyed mankind, server room, warnings, guns, errors, explosions, bomb. Okay, it's too much for me. I can't handle it. But I saw this and I was just like, okay, I'm not just pulling random topics out of a hat and like smashing them together. Other people are doing this for me. I'm just talking about them. And then something like that comes up. I didn't even search for that. I just saw somebody mention the title and I was like, oh, what's that? So I looked at it, and then lo and behold, we see how fantasy, science fiction, and like weird Gnostic stuff about humans and AIs and their differences thereof, it's all just smashed together in a very recent show. So that's that. Ripper says, Alan wasn't already logged onto foreignpolicy.com. Surprised. I think the first time I probably saw Foreign Policy, I think I seen it like at an airport newsstand. I'll be going to an airport and not the too distant future. So if they have newsstands still, I could check out. I could browse the Foreign Policy magazine, and then maybe somebody will approach me and think that I'm like the contact they were supposed to meet or something. Never know what's going to happen. Okay. So let us go and look at some stories and do some news review. So I was sent an article. Right, I opened way too many tabs. Let's go into tab closing party. So this is an article from 2010, so over 10 years ago at this point. The Last Psychiatrist. Everyone goes crazy in a different way as long as that way is... And then there's this quote here, which I'll read from the New York Times in this article titled The Americanization of Mental Illness. So let's see what this says. Quote, in some circles, it is easy to make friends with a rousing rant about the McDonald's near Tiananmen Square, the Nike factory in Malaysia, or the latest blowback from our political or military interventions abroad. For all our self-recrimination, however, we may have yet to face one of the most remarkable effects of American-led globalization. We have for many years been busily engaged in a grand project of Americanizing the world's understanding of mental health and illness. Okay, and then let's see, a Chinese psychiatrist in the 1990s talking about how definitions for things like anorexia and stuff, so concepts of Western science, Western teachings about how stuff worked, then yeah, I could understand how these could affect different places. All right, another quote. A woman passed out and died from anorexia on a subway, and here's a quote about that. Trying to explain what happened to Charlene, local reporters often simply copied out of American diagnostic manuals. The mental health experts quoted in the Hong Kong papers and magazines confidently reported that anorexia in Hong Kong was the same disorder that appeared in the United States and Europe. And then once people started to talk about these ideas, then you could see that the reports, the numbers, the counts of these things started to go up. So I'm not going to go into all the details here, but I think we could see this general problem. So in the United States, we might talk about some specific thing like anorexia, some kind of eating disorder, something like that. But the very language we use and how we talk about stuff then could actually affect the science on the ground. It's a kind of observer paradox, right? Where you start to talk about a thing and then you could observe that thing happening, where before people might not have thought about that thing in that way at all. Maybe that's what happens on Alan's stream. You're surrounded by all sorts of symbols, and you notice all these connections. But then we started to talk about all these connections, show all these things that are there, and then it's like, oh no, this stuff is all around me, and I see Gnostic philosophy being pushed everywhere. So an interesting article touches on a lot of subjects, and just as an internet archiving perspective from 2010, right? So this whole idea too of saying, in many ways, the internet it's collective memory, and it isn't. It's let's look up this term, the Mandela effect. Or we could talk about gaslighting. So what's the Mandela effect? False memory. So let's just pull up a definition. Okay, when masses of people believe an event occurred when it didn't, or more generally, right, where you could just convince people that stuff happened a certain way when maybe it happened a different way. Just looking at the nature of the technology with the interwebs, I think you could see how it's the centralized control. Servers send to clients. That's the nature of how a lot of internet stuff happens. A server has some story, some video, and then people access it from their machine. Now, if you store a local copy or you make a recording, like I'm doing with the stream, right? I'm showing various stories and things, and if I keep my notes and I archive those, then this is a kind of way to preserve and to tell the history. But if I didn't do this, I didn't explicitly make recordings in this way or commentary, things like that, then what could happen is, one thing that I saw, a year or two ago, whatever, maybe that article gets taken down. Maybe it's changed, right? So a lot of people on the internet, they've tried to have efforts like, archive.org and stuff, in order to try to keep the internet as a useful point of shared reference that we could all look at. So as a collective, as people, we could try to understand what's happening better. But I've heard even archive.org and a lot of sites that have been ostensibly designed for this purpose, they've been compromised. So at the end of the day, it's like, what could one do in order to better remember, look at history? With the internet, maybe the only way is to make your own local copies and to have videos and commentaries like what I'm doing. Because if it's on somebody else's computer, can you trust them to leave to continue to have that on their computer? Or instead, is it likely maybe they lose funding and the site goes down? So no one trying to manipulate information or do anything malicious, but just there's tons of broken links on the internet. And then more insidiously, right, somebody might try to actually change the narrative. And they'll be like, hey, the title in the URL up here doesn't match the title of the story, It's almost as if they edited one or the other, and so on and so forth. So internet forensics continues to be an interesting topic and a constantly evolving field too, as new technologies and ways of organizing information on the interwebs are rolled out. Okay, so I think I'll just go through these in the news stories. Stream's getting a bit long, and then we'll close up. So let's take a look at one. So Firefox Pocket Firefox Pocket continues to find the most science fiction stories for us. I don't even have to try to search for them. I just go into Firefox, I open a new tab, and then they have something juicy for me to look at. So today they had the story, Stories to Fuel Your Mind. And this story is titled, How to Think Like a Futurist. And then they show a chess game being played out on a calendar. All right, not a Masonic chessboard this time, just a calendar. So let's see what this is about. Want to reframe your view of what lies ahead? Innovation consultant Ari Wallach shares 3 transformative ways of thinking that could help us tackle our toughest problems. All right, what should we do? So the author writes, I've been a futurist for more than 20 years, working with businesses and nonprofits to try to anticipate and meet impending challenges. When I first started out, I'd sit down with people and say, hey, let's talk 10, 20 years out. And they'd reply, great. But gradually I've seen that time horizon get shorter and shorter. So much so that I recently met with a CEO and he said, I want to talk about the next 6 months. I call this kind of thinking short-termism, and it has pervaded every nook and cranny of our society, from our homes to our businesses to our government policies. We are facing huge problems in the world today, civilizational scale problems. However, we cannot solve them using short-term thinking. Short-termism prevents a CEO from buying expensive safety equipment because it will hurt the bottom line. So we get the Deepwater Horizon tragedy. And then it looks like they had a TED Talk called Short-Termism is Killing Us. Short-termism prevents teachers from spending quality one-on-one time with students, so students drop out of high school. Short-termism prevents us from putting money into shoring up national infrastructure, so what we get is the I-35 bridge collapse over the Mississippi River. If we want to move forward into a different future, we must adopt what I call the long path. We need to shift over to using 3 ways of thinking to approach the major problems we're tackling. So, nothing wrong, of course, with thinking ahead and trying to choose strategies that will benefit future generations and stuff. But let's look specifically at being a futurist, right? So, of course, you could talk about you want to have a sustainable, good sort of system, but what is it that makes this futurist pitch different than just saying, we should use some kind of sustainable solution instead of taking shortcuts? Because I think we could all agree, it's better to put up more cost up front to do a good job than to take shortcuts to save money in the short term. You're only cheating yourself in the long run. I think we could all agree on that. Okay, first, transgenerational thinking. When we think about doing good in the world, almost all of us think about doing it sometime between our birth and our death. But with transgenerational thinking, you can expand how you think about problems, your role in solving them, and consequences. Here is a personal example. Every once in a while, my wife and I go out to dinner with our kids. We have 3 children under the age of 7, so it's never a peaceful and quiet meal. My usual inclination is to resolve a short-term strategy, to go into my pocket, take out my phone, and let them play a game. Putting on the transgenerational thinking cap. So let's put on our transgenerational thinking cap. Means asking, okay, I can do that, but what is it teaching them? Instead, I might bring paper with me so we could draw together, or I could try to engage them in conversation. No matter which of them I choose, it won't be as easy as giving them my smartphone, but it will connect them with my wife, blah, blah, blah. So still, I don't even see how that's like futurist. That's just saying, you don't want your kids to become potatoes. Mountain Walk says the future is potatoes. If the future gives us potatoes, let us make vodka. All right, next point, telos thinking. Okay, they're pulling out the big Greek word, telos, end goal. Telos comes from Greek and it means ultimate aim or ultimate purpose. This entails asking yourself one question: to what end? As you try to solve a particular problem, we should think about what will come after we solve it. Okay, Thomas Kuhn, Paradigm Shift, Martin Luther King. All right, you dropped some establishment-approved smart people, so you must be wise. In our short-term society, we often feel like we don't have control over the future, but it's this thing we're just waiting to wash over us. But that isn't true. We do have control, but it requires strategic thinking and action on our part. Imagining, here, this article ties in itself. Imagining, here we go. Imagining many possible futures and thinking beyond our own lifespans. We should all try to push past our own lives. It might make us do things that are a little bigger than what we thought were possible. Okay, so I think this last sentence brings the crux to it. What is it to be like a futurist? Okay, you have to use your big brain imagination to think about possible futures. And the imagination aspect comes into it like this. They want you to envision a future, to envision something better. And oftentimes what that means for business is pitching stuff like the Neon City. So saying like, let's imagine a better world. Then what do you come up with? Well, you come up with Neon in Saudi Arabia. And if Neon actually succeeds at what they're saying they're going to do, then I think, it could be comfortable in many respects. But envisioning and trying and future planning, using your imaginations to make Neon, if you don't succeed and you try to reach for the stars and make Neon this way, then what is the cost? A bunch of used up batteries at the bottom of the ocean, crazy debt, making people poor for generations, and so on and so forth. So while this article, I think, does have some common sense mixed into it in that, you shouldn't just take shortcuts and screw yourself over. It seems like really the big pitch is to try to sell science fiction fantasies. So that's why you're thinking like a futurist, because you're like, let's invest in green energy now instead of taking a shortcut and using gasoline motors. But maybe what you really should do is say, let's not even do cars and stuff. Let's just learn how to do organic farming and do it as time tested and actually works. But I digress. That's a topic for another day. All right. Next story. How to spend your money for maximum happiness. So for those of you who are here for my last stream, I did a whole stream on talking about how people are selling experiences as opposed to selling goods and like material things. Basically, the way in which a lot of like travel, luxuries, vacations, things like this were sold is the marketing went something like saying, oh yeah, you know, material goods and stuff, they could only make you happy in such a short time period, and then they actually might cause more trouble for you because you'll have all this stuff that you don't want in your living space. But instead, you should buy experiences, and if you buy all these experiences, then you know they live on as memories and stuff, and yada yada yada. And my basic analysis of it was that the so-called experiences that they're selling, you know, it's consumerism by a different name. And it falls in line with you will own nothing and be happy. If you follow the you will own nothing and be happy approach, then this means, yeah, you're just going to chill out and enjoy experiences. Oh, come on, YouTube. You're not giving me... I wanted to see that grinning guy for my top result. Anyways, I think you all know what I'm talking about you will own nothing and be happy. So, this article, Firefox Pocket, then they're talking again, trying to sell experiences in some sort of way, how to spend your money to be maximally happy, according to behavioral and psychological research. So, how does the science tell you to be happy? And they got all these graphs and stuff. Time famine, inventing some new interesting words. The more money you have, the less material goods make you happy. So once again, contrast between material goods versus some kind of experience, whatever experience means. And then talking about how people with different amounts of money think about stuff differently. Getting a reminder about money makes people work more and socialize less. A portion of time spent socializing or working when prompted to think about it. All right. The key takeaways. Let's skip to the too long didn't read. All right. Mountain Walk says, isn't that what Mark Zuckerberg is doing with Metaverse? Yeah, exactly. So what Metaverse is doing is they're trying to sell the experiences. So Metaverse, it's basically like selling drugs that you don't have to inject into yourself, right? So if you could convince people, you don't even have to fly an airplane to go on a vacation. But if you could accept that going to different worlds by traveling within the Metaverse is a suitable substitute for like traveling or something, you distill the if you could distill the experiences to a digital product in some sense, then you control the whole market of everything because you sell experiences directly. And I'm just remembering this game and this Shadowrun tabletop game. I played the video game version of this thing. Shadowrun. There was this thing where there would be like this drug where you replay memories or something. It was one of the plot devices. But this would be the sort of experience thing that we're talking about, where it's like rather than actually doing stuff, going out and, with all the messiness and suffering that's involved, people could partake of, like, plug a thing in your brain and relive a happy memory or something. So I forgot what they were called in this game, but this would be one of the idea of essentially what the metaverse is trying to go for eventually. Oh, this is a retro looking guide. All right, we won't try to search this. I think I summarized it well enough to get the idea across. Okay, Mountain Walk says I'm getting into the pod. All right, have a good pod run. Hello from my pod to your pod. Mountain Walk says I never played Shadowrun, but I heard a lot of people really like it. Yeah, it was a pretty cheap game. I was just looking for something that I could, like, an enjoyable, like, single player game to sort of click through. I was seeking an experience, and it delivered. It offered a pretty good experience for me in my pod. So as one pod dweller to another pod dweller, I could recommend the Shadow experience as a pretty good experience. Let's see. All right, so then it's talking about leisure activities. So exercising and volunteering are good for happiness. Invest in experiences. There we go. There's the punchline. There's the takeaway. So in the end, should you buy things? No. If you spend, like, dinner, do stuff with people, then ultimately this will lead you to be more happy. So instead of buying stuff, buy experiences. Now, okay, I want to highlight here, I'm not saying it's not good to spend money. Like, of course, you should not be a cheapo, and you should use your money in a way that's useful. Like, money is just a means to an end, right? Money's just a tool. You can't take money down to the grave with you. So if you use the money that you have while you're alive in useful ways, what else could you do with your money? But looking at how a lot of these articles are framing it, right? How to spend your money for maximum happiness. Just think of the telos, the goal, the telos of the approach that a lot of psychologists, mental health people will talk about, just decision making, right? So you're trying to maximize happiness. So then you look at all these charts about how people report if they're happy or not. And then you're like, all right, I need to hang out with people because therefore it will make me happy, right? The whole goal and decision-making structure of the approach, what they're talking about in this article, is restrained by the nature of behavior and psychological research. The sort of raw data that they could get at the end of the day is only like people's self-reports on how they feel happy or something, and then it's aggregated data. So of course every individual, unique people, differences between people, but the nature of a lot of statistics, psychological research, it's not like somebody telling you a story, telling you about their experiences. Rather, the nature of statistics, aggregate data, is smashing stuff together. So it's like, all right, there's this game, you're alive on this earth. All right, okay, how do we maximize happiness? How should I spend money on happiness? Okay, don't buy a bunch of Funko Pops. Instead, all right, gotta go to dinner with friends. All right, if I do these experiences, then that will maximize my happiness. And it's like, so not wrong, I would say, in like the ultimate recommendations they give, and that, like, you have friends come over, don't like pinch pennies and buy them the cheapest fast food. Like you could be generous and stuff with the big bucks and stuff. But the nature of the methodologies that they're using here, trying to be scientific about stuff, the depth of the analysis that they could give is limited by the approach, and it's quite shallow and unhelpful, in my opinion. It doesn't answer any of the key underlying issues about how is it that somebody feels satisfaction. And I think one of the Christian answers to this question would be, how do we ultimately feel peace, right? Satisfaction. It's, You willingly take up your cross. You do the right thing. You willingly suffer in order to serve others, to serve God, to do what's right. Then you're going to feel peace, fulfillment that nothing else could give you. And you don't need like all the science and psychology and stuff to experience or to understand that. But the nature of the psychology, all this, because certain ways of talking about things are just off the table, then they're limited in the answers. They could only talk about happiness in terms of, what product do I consume? And they're like, of the products to consume, between thing and experience. Experience better than thing. It's like, all right, fair enough. Okay, Mountain Walk says, interdasting stuff. Alan telling me to be a spendthrift. Yes, am I telling you to be thrifty or to spend? We must find that happy balance and do the right thing in the right season. That's the goal. We use the right tool for the right job. Okay, cool. Let's look at this last story here. Okay, 7 powerful habits of people with high emotional intelligence. So once again, this is all coming from this Firefox new tab thing. It's like the fountain of technocratic elite, like philosophy or whatever you want to call it. So highly interesting stuff. What's 7 powerful habits of people with high emotional intelligence? And I'll just want to make like a sort of meta note. Ask yourself this: what sort of person reads articles that's like who's going to read an article about how being high IQ is good for you, or like being emotionally intelligent is good, right? Oftentimes, I think that the appeal of these articles is kind of flattery to people in some form of it or another. So let's say you have somebody, they aren't so good at math problems, but in their mind they come up with a story like, I'm not so good at math problems, but the way in which I'm better than my peers, the way in which I'm a cool, smart guy, is that I have high emotional intelligence. Therefore, I am a valuable member of this team because those other people, they're just nerds. They might be better at math problems, but I have emotional intelligence. So I will read this article in order to look at how I'm a valuable member of this team. So I'm not saying everybody that reads this article is that way, but I think oftentimes, just from my own experience and even looking at how I myself have been attracted to certain particular topics. Like I'll just give one example with Elon Musk. There's this whole first principles thing that was really memeing for a long while. It's like Elon Musk is a smart guy because he uses first principles and he thinks for himself. So instead of just doing what everybody else is doing for an engineering solution, then Elon Musk returns to first principles and then comes up with these original solutions through his, massive brain power and imagination. So I looked into this topic and read a bunch of these things because I would look at my own self and what I had done, and I would be like, maybe the reason that, and I'm making up this dialogue, I didn't literally think these things, but the sort of idea of what the process might be like would be, maybe I didn't get selected for this research program or whatever, but I just need to persevere because I'm like Elon Musk in that I'm thinking from first principles. I'm being big brain and smart. So I just doubled down on this approach and focus on first principles, a most effective strategy for breaking down complicated problems. Then that's good. Then I'm doing the right thing, right? So a person could easily get sucked into reading a particular sort of thing that is basically flattering them in a sense that if I just assume that I am following first principles thinking and even do some first principles type exercises, and then I just read like 10 articles about how thinking from first principles is great, then what happens is like I just walk away. I spent 12 hours or whatever in a day, and I think like highly of myself because I'm like, haha, I'm one of these rare people with this insight into like first principles thinking. Something like that. Anyways, so I bring up like emotional intelligence as being one of the things that could be kind of similar, where the sort of person or the sort of mindset that one would go into often learning about emotional intelligence might be to say like, I work with these engineer people. I know they're really smart, but they're like basically autistic. They can't relate to people or interface with people. They only interface with computers. But I'm the people element. So let's take a look at what emotionally intelligent people do. Think about the people who always seem to get what they want. Yeah, why can't I get what I want? I want a lot of stuff, but I don't get it. So appeal to the passion there of envy. Why don't you get the stuff that you want? Are they self-centered? So thinking like, I don't get what I want because I'm not willing to be evil or selfish, but they get what they want because they're willing to be selfish. Are they their best advocates? When you think of their success, do you feel happy for them? Do you admire them? If you don't, let's assume our purposes that other people, for our purposes that other people don't admire them either. So how does someone become successful while consistently making enemies? And if you do admire them, think about that too. Is it purely the scope of their success that prompts your respect? Or is it something else? Perhaps something about the way they make you feel about them. Another word for feelings, emotions. Truly emotionally intelligent people understand this. And that's why they work to adopt some very powerful habits to make it easier and more likely for them to get what they want. Habits like these, for example. Okay, so it's talking about like if you become an expert feelings manager, you understand the feelings and you do the right things with the feelings. That's what they study in psychology. A lot of the social sciences, by the way, even like rhetoric, talking about communications and stuff. A lot of it's about managing a feeling space, for lack of a better term. So high emotional intelligence, are you a good feelings wizard? Let's learn about what it's like to be a feelings wizard. Number one, they seek support. Emotionally intelligent people seek to support. Okay, emotionally intelligent people seek to support other people. Sounds altruistic, doesn't it? Well, it can be, but it can also be strategic, even shrewd. Because people are concerned about what affects them, they might be kind, decent, noble, even selfless. They're still human beings, and they will react to the way things affect them personally. If you want to engage with people effectively, think about whether your words and actions are offered in a way that seems to support them or that seems to support yourself. So it's talking about understand emotions and like basically do some subtle virtue signaling. Make people do the actions, do the things to make people believe that you support them. That's how you be emotionally intelligent. All right, let's continue. They watch their language. I don't mean they don't curse. They might. So you could look at the words you use and how other people react to that. All right, so that's just to say, right, words could make people feel particular ways, so don't, trigger people and make them shut down. Makes sense. They don't assume. All right, if you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And if you assume something about somebody, you might offend them a lot. We assume things that aren't necessarily true, so on and so forth. They embrace silence. Alright, so you don't feel a compulsive need to just keep on talking to fill up all the gaps. They focus when it's time to focus on others. Yeah, so you're emotionally intelligent in that you aren't just like running a script. You actually respond to other people. They admit their shortcomings, because if you don't admit your shortcomings, then you can't be strategic, right? If you think that you're successful in some way and you actually aren't, that won't do you much good. Anecdote. Emotionally intelligent people embrace their strength, and they also admit their shortcomings. Then they ask for help. That leaves them in a much better position to succeed. And finally, they don't assume the worst. And I would say along with they don't assume the worst, yeah, I mean, it's just like don't invent fantasies and stuff to just make yourself feel justified. Instead, you could just observe what's happening. You don't have to be butthurt. Okay, so let's just read the last couple things here. The thing I love about writing about building emotional intelligence is that in retrospect, most of the best practices seem a bit obvious. They're easy to articulate at least, although often hard to put into practice. Still, they're worth the effort. Learn these habits of emotionally intelligent people, and you'll be in a better position to achieve the things you really want. So, I think this was a thoroughly uninformative article. It's just to say, if you're going for certain goals, don't be a total ignoramus about other people and their emotions and stuff. And the author admitted, that a lot of this stuff seems, common sense type stuff. Anyways, I thought that more interesting than the actual content of this article was just looking at the sort of stories that are put out in self-improvement type space, especially to tech nerds, because I said Firefox browser. Usually more technically interested people would be using Firefox browser or something. And then this is one of the stories that was brought up on a new tab. And let's assume that people actually read these, or people are at least clicking on them. And then we could look at ourselves and stuff and say, like, what might get me to actually look at this sort of thing? What might get me to click on this thing? And then also looking at a lot of the content on the internet at the end of the day, does reading this sort of article or something actually contribute much value to me? Did I actually learn anything from it? Or do I find that if I just look at listicles, it's not very useful? Or, right, you could ask this question: how do I use something like a listicle more effectively? So, like, one thing I'm actively trying to do on this show is I'll go over the news and stuff, because I would be browsing the internet and doing this sort of thing anyways. But if I could work with you all in order to better understand how to use the internet, then, for example, here with my topic list and stuff, I could find how do you actually turn reading internet articles and stuff into you like writing or thinking about stuff. Like for me with this show, one of the ways is through turning what could be idle internet browsing into a sort of news review show, at least for the latter portion of shows. Then I now am harvesting data and doing some kind of research, as opposed to just like I should be more emotionally intelligent. It actually helps me do something. In the same way too, right? If you guys notice and see things that we bounce around ideas and we do give each other pushback, If we say stupid stuff, then we can all help each other. Mountain Walk says, F that article, I use that word loosely. Yeah. It's hardly even, like, they gave up writing paragraphs. So if you call this, like, is this our peak journalism? It's admitting what you don't know. Period. Like, do people go to college and get degrees to write sentences? Like, it's admitting what you don't know. I'm admitting I don't know about what the value of this sentence is. So, meta. We're being meta. We're meta thought. Meta conversation. Okay, cool. So I'll have to leave. The stream's been going on for a while, so I'll talk more about... I was going to talk about avatars and some space stuff, but I think we'll save that for next stream. And I was bringing up these topics of avatars as a bridge to talk about how science fiction and fantasy are all coming together, and these ideas from the old ancient Far East religions and things are being translated to the metaverse. But I will use my emotional intelligence and save this for the next stream, and encourage you all to join then or to view it later. So thanks to everybody who came to view this stream. A lot of topics today. Yeah, so that's that. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Thanks for joining.